Hello and welcome to Lyon Air Museum, founded by General William Lyon. The museum houses many of the aircraft that General Lyon flew during World War II and Korea, but General Lyon was also a car guy. So we do feature cars from time to time in the museum, and one of our main exhibits this summer is There's a Ford in Your Future. Let's go down and take a look. And what's a Ford exhibit without a Ford Model T? So what we have here is a 1922 Model T Roadster runabout. And of course this one, built in 1922, was a little more advanced than the earlier ones. The first ones were produced in 1908. And they're really considered the world's first all-purpose utility vehicle. They served and were adapted for a variety of roles. They served as pickup trucks and ambulances and vans and police patrol cars and tractors and, would you believe, even snowmobiles. When production first started on the Model T back in 1908, they were priced at about $850, which was a huge amount of money back then. As time went on, by December of 1913, they had figured out the assembly line, and they took a process that was taking 12 hours to complete down to about an hour and 33 minutes. And the cost decreased from that $850 in 1908 to under $300 in 1922. And by May of 1927, when the last Model T rolled off the assembly line, 15 million of these had been built. A little bit about them: 22 horsepower, 177 cubic inch four-cylinder engine, 100-inch wheelbase. And if you can see in the cockpit, really interesting because the controls in the cockpit are different than what we traditionally know today. You can see an emergency brake and a clutch release, which is a handle over on the left-hand side there. And then the left pedal is called a high and low speed clutch, but it doesn't actually operate like the clutches we know today. The middle pedal is a reverse pedal. You stand on that to go in reverse. And the foot brake is on the right, where we're used to there being a gas pedal. This has a two-speed Ruckstuhl axle, which is the other knob that sticks up kind of out of the middle of the cockpit there. And then on the steering wheel, you have the spark advance over on the left side. You have the throttle on the right side. So if you look at that little lever on the right side is the throttle. And then there's a choke on the dash. So it takes a little getting used to driving one of these things around. In the early 1920s, Ford had purchased hundreds of thousands of acres of forests in Michigan's Upper Peninsula and became known as the Ford Forests. They established a sawmill, lumber processing plant, and factory near the city of Iron Mountain. You'll see here in this 1929 Ford Model A station wagon, all the woodwork around the vehicle's body is typically made of maple, birch, mahogany, and gum wood. The Ford station wagon was the first mass-produced station wagon, and it's kind of interesting where they got their name. You know, they were really used to transport passengers and baggage between train stations, so thus the station wagon. Of the 1.5 million Model A vehicles produced in 1929, just under 5,000 of them were station wagons. They were powered by a 200 cubic inch four-cylinder engine that produced about 40 horsepower, and these retailed for $695 back then. And what we have here is a 1929 Ford Model A town car. This one's pretty rare. There's about maybe 30 of these left in the world. The idea of this size car was to be a little more maneuverable than some of the larger limousines, so they could get around, parking in city streets a little easier. Henry Ford offered these for $1,400, which was more than twice the cost of your standard Model A. But it was still less expensive than the competition, the Packards, the Cadillacs, and the Lincoln Town Car. Come around inside here, we'll take a look at where the VIP sat. So they had their own little compartment. It was, had a glass partition between the chauffeur and the passengers. You can see the top that goes on the front, that's down there on the floor rolled up, but that would go over the chauffeur in inclement weather. The other thing that's kind of neat here is the little curtains. There's one in the back and one on each side. And one of my personal favorites here, the 1930 Model A Roadster pickup. The Model A was the first to incorporate the standard driving controls. As you recall, the Model T had those really what seemed now to be funky driver controls, but these were pretty conventional with the clutch and brake pedals and a throttle and a gear shift lever. This one is powered by 40 horsepower, 201 cubic inch four-cylinder engine. In 1930, there was over 850,000 Model A's produced. Of that, about 124,000 of those were roadsters like this one. Kind of interesting, by the 1940s and 1950s, the Model A was used quite a bit for the hot rodders and drag racers. You might recall the Beach Boys song Little Deuce Coupe, which was inspired by a 1932, which was really a Model B, but quite similar. And what we have here is the 1931 Model A. This is a Phaeton. This particular Phaeton was once owned by Ray Kroc, and he's the McDonald's hamburger chain guy. Later on, it was owned by a guy named Jim Bailey. And interestingly, Jim Bailey worked for General William Lyon at the William Lyon Company. And when Jim Bailey retired, because General Lyon loved this car so much, he actually gifted it to General Lyon. And we can take a look here at this lovely engine, 201 cubic inches. About 40 horsepower. This little engine could propel the car to about 65 miles an hour as a top speed. And next we're looking at the engine of the mighty Douglas A26 Invader. That engine is an 18-cylinder, 2,800 cubic inch, 2,000 horsepower monster. The aircraft is powered by two of those. Looking at the overall aircraft here, A26 was used in World War II, Korea, and even as late as Vietnam. Typically had a crew of three. It was the pilot, the navigator / bombardier, and a gunner. First flew in 1942. Had a cruise speed of about 250 miles an hour. You can see that big laminar flow wing. For those of you out there who know the aerodynamics and wing foils, that's a NACA 65-215. Aircraft had basically a V&E, a never exceed speed of somewhere around 425 miles an hour, I believe. Somebody can correct me on that. Fuel burn was probably somewhere in the 80 to 95 gallons per hour, depending on the mission. That's per engine. Had a typical bomb load of about 4,000 internal and 2,000 pounds external. And has the distinction of having the biggest engines in Lyon Air Museum. And now under the A26, under its left wing, is our 1934 Model 40. This is a deluxe Phaeton. Absolute beautiful car. See the little Greyhound on the top that just went by? That's top the radiator cap there. That was an option, a little classy option back then. This car is powered by the 221 cubic inch flathead V8 at an impressive 85 horsepower. In that time period, Ford offered dozens of body choices, a lot of different styles. They were all on the 112-inch wheelbase. He had everything from basic coupes to roadsters to two-door sedans and cabriolets and convertible sedans and four-door sedans and Phaetons like this, and even a Victoria. Okay, and mixed in among the Fords, of course, we have some famous World War II aircraft. This is a Boeing Stearman biplane. This was a basic trainer during World War II. It's powered by a 680 cubic inch 9-cylinder radial engine that put out about 225 horsepower. This particular airplane was built in 1944 and used to train Army cadets. It was based in Texas. This airplane was good for about 95 miles an hour. And next to the Stearman biplane is the advanced trainer built by North American Aviation called the T6 Texan. So cadets would transition into this, and this would be pretty much the last plane that they flew before they started flying some of the fighters and bombers of World War II. This one's powered by a 600 horsepower 9-cylinder radial engine, 1,340 cubic inches. It's got a 42-foot wingspan, tandem seating. The instructor would typically sit in the back, and the trainee would sit up front. Airplane was great for aerobatics. As you can see, it's a tail dragger, what we call a tail dragger, where the tail wheel, the third wheel is in the back instead of the front. Makes it a little more difficult to fly. Not necessarily fly, but land and take off. And this is built by the same people who built the famous North American P-51 Mustang. And that was really by design. This airplane flies a lot like a P-51, just at much slower speed, but it has a lot of the same controls and everything that would be in position to best equip the aviator to move forward into the faster flying fighters and bombers. Okay, and here's our 1934 Model 40 station wagon. This is another one that's powered by one of the flathead V8s, 221 cubic inches. We'll take a look at that here in a moment. Henry Ford's only son, Edsel Ford, personally oversaw the design of the 34 station wagon. Ford offered only two passenger models for 1936. That was the Model 48 and the Model 68 series. This is the Model 68 Club Cabriolet. It was powered by an 85 horsepower, 221 cubic inch flathead V8 and came in a number of body styles. '36 was the first year that they used the pressed steel wheels instead of the traditional wire wheels. 36 would also be the last year that headlights were freestanding instead of being integrated into the body. The Model 68 Club Cabriolet combined the sportiness of an open roadster with the comfort and security of a sedan. And the car listed for $625 and included an open rumble seat. Let's take a look. How about that for a great place to sit? And here we have the 1941 Model 11A Super Deluxe convertible club coupe. The 1941 Model 11A was the last civilian Ford produced until the war ended, World War II. Super Deluxe was powered by a 226 cubic inch, 90 horsepower V8. And the Super Deluxe had just more chrome, leather seats, wood grain dashboard. The standard models came with a 6-cylinder, but of course this has the V8. During this time period, there was a labor strike, April of 1941, and Henry Ford had resisted unionizing his company, but with much pressure eventually he had to, and he ended up signing a contract with the United Auto Workers Union at that time. This particular car is a replication of the one that General Lyon bought brand new prior to his involvement in World War II. Ford was heavily involved in World War II. Many contributions to the war effort, helping to build the arsenal of democracy. Ford had built 6,790 B-24 Liberator bombers. They built over 58,000 R-2800 Pratt & Whitney radial engines, built 52,000 aircraft turbo superchargers, 17,000 drop tanks, 4,400 combat gliders, 1,600 Sherman tanks, tank destroyers, tank engines. They're probably best known for building the B-24s at Willow Run Factory, which was 332 acres, employed 40,000 employees, housed 15,000 employees. It's just an amazing complex. The aircraft we're walking around right now is a North American B-25 Mitchell, which was a medium bomber used during World War II. This particular one saw some service in the Aleutian Islands as a patrol bomber. It's powered by two 1,700 horsepower Wright Cyclone radial engines. They're 2,600 cubic inches, and they're 14 cylinders each. Interestingly, oil capacity on this airplane, each side, 37.5 gallons. So you're talking 75 gallons, which is 300 quarts of oil. Airplane probably burns somewhere around 75 gallons of fuel an hour per side. B-25 is probably known best for its participation in a famous mission called the Doolittle Raid. And that's when 16 of these aircraft were loaded aboard the USS Hornet for April 18th, 1942, and sent to bomb Tokyo. Jimmy Doolittle led that raid. All the aircraft were lost. Most of the crew members were able to return. Some were captured and killed, unfortunately. Ford built 282,000 Jeeps for the war effort during World War II. This is one of them. The Ford Jeep was powered by a 4-cylinder, 134 cubic inch engine, 3-speed synchro mesh gearbox. Gross weight was about 2,400 pounds. Total number of Jeeps made during the war was 647,000, made by others, 282,000 by Ford. On the Ford Jeeps, they had the Ford script. You could find little F's were stamped on just about every part. Many of the nuts and bolts, all the other pieces. So if you're around a Jeep and you kind of poke around, sometimes you can find those little F's everywhere. I know there's some on this one. Ford built 16,104 station wagons in 1947. With this Woody finished in Glade Green, which was a very popular post-war color for the manufacturer. Had a wheelbase of 114 inches, had a 100 horsepower engine from the legendary 200 and let's call it a 40 cubic inch flathead V8, 3-speed transmission. It was the most expensive model, the Super Deluxe Woody, for Ford in the model year 1947. Of course, Woodies are really part of our Southern California pop culture. They were immortalized in popular songs by the Beach Boys and Jan and Dean. Surfers loved them. Older Woodies could be purchased fairly cheaply. They carried a lot of surfboards and people. They were a party on wheels. Taking a look at the flathead. And of course the Optima battery is a modern upgrade. Optima supplies a lot of batteries to the Lyon Air Museum and the car inventory. And here we have a 1956 Continental Mark II. This particular car was commissioned for Oscar-winning actress Elizabeth Taylor. The exterior color was painted to harmonize with Elizabeth's radiant violet blue eyes. The long hood here covered a 368 cubic inch V8 engine, put out about 285 horsepower. You look at that 4-pointed front star on the hood that later became Lincoln's iconic official logo. These cars attracted a lot of noteworthy people, politicians and business and world leaders and celebrities. Some of the people who own these: Senator Barry Goldwater, President Eisenhower, Howard Johnson of the hotel and restaurant fame, Nelson Rockefeller, the Shah of Iran, film producer Daryl Zanuck, Hedy Lamarr, Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley. So these cars were typically in good company. This one is on loan from the Robert Ratnoff collection. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, 800 unarmed C-47s delivered over 13,000 paratroopers into Normandy and also towed gliders full of men and equipment. This is Lyon Air Museum C-47. C-47 had a crew of 3, a pilot, a co-pilot, and a navigator. But it also carried troops, typically 20 to 28 paratroopers. It was powered by two 1,200 horsepower R1830 14-cylinder radial engines. Had a gross weight of over 30,000 pounds. And cruise speed was only about 160 miles an hour, and it was unarmed. Lyon Air Museum C-47 is named Willadine after our founder, General William Lyon's wife. And it flies locally, typically to different air shows. Ford became a public company in 1956, and one of their first decisions was to create a kind of a mid-price, mid-size car that could compete with the likes of Chrysler and General Motors. The board settled on the name Edsel, which is the only child of company founder Henry. It was the father of Chairman Henry Ford II and the second president of the company from 1919 until his passing in 1943 at age 49. So this 1958 Edsel two-door convertible features these great innovative options like a teletouch transmission. Its safety features including double latch doors, child-proof door locks. It was way ahead of its time. When the Edsel brand was announced in 1957, it was heavily promoted by Ford. They had a massive campaign that teased the release date of September 4th, 1957 as E-Day, kind of like D-Day. Ford had also partnered with CBS, and they developed a variety television show. It was called the Edsel Show, and it was hosted by Bing Crosby. When finally unveiled, turned out the Edsel really fell short of all the hype and the great expectations. Consumers just weren't ready for some of the look, particularly that horse collar center grille. Of course, now there's quite a following for these beasts on the road. This particular one was manufactured at the Ford plant in San Jose, California, on September 11th, 1957. It wears mostly its original factory colors of sunset coral with white scallops, and is powered by a 361 cubic inch V8 of 303 horsepower. And this belongs to the Cook family collection. And what's a Ford exhibit without a pink Mustang? Mustangs being one of our favorites here. Mustang really began in 1961 as a proposal from Ford. They were looking for a kind of a long hood, short deck, two-seat mid-engine sports car. They played around with a couple of designs. One of those designs that they had built two concept cars with debuted at the 1961 U.S. Grand Prix driven by Dan Gurney. That looked different than what Ford's Mustang ultimately looked like, which was unveiled on April 17th, 1964. Turned out to just be a huge success. Ford had projected about 100,000 units for the first production year, and they ended up at 318,000. 18 months later, they had built 1 million. Interestingly, that the Mustang brand that continues to this day, now is an electric vehicle. Back in 2018, they figured that they had built 10 million Mustangs. Of course, the Mustang's another one of those pop culture icons. Probably the most famous one was 1968 Mustang GT Fastback that was in Bullitt, with Steve McQueen driving against that Dodge Challenger. Crazy chase scene in the streets of San Francisco. This particular Mustang is part of the Robert McRae collection. And here we have Lyon Air Museum's Douglas DC-3 flagship Orange County. This particular airplane started its life as a C-47 cargo plane and troop carrier during World War II, and actually saw a mission on D-Day in June 6, 1944, when it dropped the 101st Airborne out of this exact airplane on Drop Zone Delta in Normandy. It's powered by 1,200 horsepower Pratt & Whitney 1830 twin Wasp 14-cylinder radial engines. Some of them were powered by our 1829-cylinder radial engines, but this is one of the 14-cylinder radial engine configurations. Typical cruise speed was about 150 miles an hour. They would typically carry a pilot, a co-pilot, and 21 to 28 passengers as an airliner. And below the DC-3, we have what has often been called America's first personal luxury car, 1966 Ford Thunderbird convertible roadster. The Thunderbird was originally introduced in 1955 as a sporty two-seater, but by 1958 it had evolved, and they even offered a four-seater as well. The fourth generation T-Bird was built from 1964 to 1966. The 1966 is considered the ultimate personal luxury automobile available for the American market at the time. Car had really interesting, space age amenities inside, a futuristic dash, really interesting electrical rocker switches. Seats were mounted inboard, kind of giving the appearance that they were hovering. Check out the speedometer in there that lights up as you go up through the speeds. This particular Thunderbird features the rare Roadster package. Has a lift-off tonneau cover that covers a full rear seat. Kelsey Hayes wire wheels. Also had the optional 345 horsepower, 428 cubic inch V8. Had a 3-speed cruise-o-matic transmission. And while it probably didn't corner all that well, it said that its 0 to 60 speed could be achieved in about 9 seconds. And T-Birds were another of the American pop culture. 1964 Beach Boys. You may recall the high school girl who had fun till her daddy took the T-Bird away. 1999 movie, Thelma and Louise. You might recall the fugitive duo famously ending their crime spree by driving off the Grand Canyon cliff in a green 1966 Thunderbird convertible. One last tidbit of information, the 1966 model was the first Thunderbird that included power front disc brakes as standard. If you look closely in the first generation of the Ford GT, you can notice something in the headlights. There's a 100 in there, and that's to commemorate the company's 100th anniversary. The production of the Ford GT started in fall of 2004 and continued through 2006. Just over 4,000 cars built. This Ford GT is a 2005. It was about 2,027 of these built in 2005. This particular car was built for Dan Gurney, famous Dan Gurney, who won the 1967 Le Mans. Has the Gurney bubble. The Ford factory did not put Gurney bubbles on their Ford GTs. This one was done special for Dan Gurney. Dan Gurney was 6'4", so the original Ford GT40s needed that little bit of clearance for his helmet. While this car likely doesn't need that clearance, it definitely is a nice little symbolic nod to that 1967 Le Mans winning Ford GT40. And next to the 2005 Ford GT is the second generation Ford GT. This one, like the other, belongs to the Gurney family and All-American Racers collection. This one was ordered specifically for Dan Gurney. It's the 67 Heritage Edition. This is serial number 67, again as a nod to the 67 Le Mans when Dan Gurney and A.J. Foyt won. Unlike the V8 of the 2005 GT, this one has a V6, just twin turbocharged, 700 horsepower, which is about a 28% increase over the first generation Ford GT. Unfortunately, Dan Gurney passed away on January 14th, 2018, just before this car was to be delivered. But the family maintains it as a tribute to Dan Gurney. And here we have Lyon Air Museum's Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, which was considered a heavy bomber in World War II. If you had to say what the definitive bomber of all time is, maybe the B-17 would be it. These things were very heavily used, daylight bombing over Germany during the war. They had a crew of 10, which consisted of a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator, a bombardier, a flight engineer / top turret gunner, a radio operator / gunner, 2 waist gunners, a tail gunner, and a ball turret gunner. Had a maximum normal load of about 8,000 pounds, but with special external racks and a maximum short-range bomb load could be as much as 17,600 pounds. Typical armament was up to 13 50 caliber machine guns, which could fire about 800 rounds per minute, which is 13 rounds per second per gun. Had a cruise speed of about 170 miles an hour. It was powered by 4 1,200 horsepower Wright Cyclone R1820 turbo supercharged 9-cylinder radial engines, and those drove an 11-foot 7-inch diameter Hamilton standard propeller. And here's some interesting facts about the engines. Each engine had 37 gallons of oil. It was a tank that was behind the engine. So if you want to take that to per 37 per engine times 4 engines, that's 148. Multiply by 4 if you want to know what it is in quarts. You got 592 quarts of engine oil. Now fuel burn. Each engine burned about 50 gallons an hour at cruise power. So that's 200 gallons an hour. To put some perspective to that, today's fuel price on the airfield here for 100 low lead aviation fuel is $5.40 a gallon, about. So that's a fuel burn of 3.33 gallons per minute, which is $18 per minute, which is about $1 every 3.5 seconds. The iconic Ford Bronco, one of our favorites. Bronco was a brainchild of Donald Fry and the legendary Lee Iacocca, who designed the legendary Mustang. It was built to compete with the Jeep CJ5 and the Harvester Scout, International Harvester. This particular example, 1966 Roadster. Roadsters were rather rare. Think of the 23,000 Broncos built, about 4,000 of them were the Roadster model. Neat features like no doors, a fold-down windshield. This one had the optional 289 V8. It was about 200 horsepower. And this beautiful example is on loan for the exhibit by the Terry and Faith Marvel collection. And next to the 66 Ford Bronco Roadster is the brand new 2021 Ford Bronco. This is the design study concept vehicle, direct from Ford. Thank you, Ford. So the first customer spec 2021 Bronco rolled off the Ford assembly line in Wayne, Michigan just a couple of months ago, June 14th, which is kind of neat because that was about 2 days past the 25th anniversary of the last Bronco to be completed there. This one has the optional Sasquatch package, which equips the vehicle for extreme off-roading. It adds 35-inch mud terrain tires. It's got beadlock capable wheels, locking front and rear axles, and a high clearance suspension. Power options for the Bronco are going to include the 200 horsepower 2.3 liter EcoBoost V6 or the optional 330 horsepower 2.7 EcoBoost twin turbocharged V6 with a 10-speed select shift automatic or a 7-speed manual transmission. And from what we're hearing and seeing, it looks like the new Ford Bronco is going to continue the legacy of the Bronco vehicles. And that's a quick walkthrough at Lyon Air Museum. Hope you enjoyed just taking a little sneak peek at some of the vehicles here on display. They'll be on display here this summer, 2021 through Labor Day. And of course the airplanes are generally here all the time unless they're out flying. So come see us. We're open 10 to 4 daily, 7 days a week. And we've got great docents here, show people around, a lot of knowledgeable people. And we look forward to seeing you here at Lyon Air Museum at John Wayne Airport.